I always got the same answer because the baby store was all out of boys. But as you'll see in this story, my sisters are actually pretty great. And when you live on a farm, you need all the help you can get. My family grew maize, which is another word for white corn. In our language, we lovingly refer it to chimanga. And growing chimanga required all hands. Every planting season, my sisters and I would wake up before dawn to hoe the weeds, dig out careful rows, then push the seeds gently into the soft soil. When it came time to harvest, we were busy again. Most families in Malawi are farmers. We live our entire lives out in the country, far away from the city, where we can tend our fields and raise our animals. Where we live, there are no computers or video games, very few televisions, and for most of my life, we didn't have electricity, just oil lamps that spewed smoke and coated our lungs with soot. Farmers here have always been poor and not many can afford an education. Seeing a doctor is also difficult since most of us don't own cars. From the time we're born, we're given a life with very few options. Because of this poverty and lack of knowledge, Malawians found help wherever they could. Many of us turned to magic, which is how my story begins. You see, before I discovered the miracle of science, I believed that magic ruled the world, not magician magic, like pulling rabbits out of your hat or sawing ladies in half, the sort of thing you see on television. It was an invisible kind of magic, one that surrounded us like the air we breathe. In Malawi, magic came in many forms, the most common being the witch doctor, whom we called Singaga. The wizards were mysterious people. Some appeared in public, usually in the markets on Sundays, sitting on blankets spread with bones and spices and powders that claimed to cure everything from dandruff to cancer. Poor people walked many miles to visit these men since they didn't have money for real doctors. This led to problems, especially if a person was truly sick. Take diarrhea, for example. Diarrhea is a common ailment in the countryside that comes from drinking dirty water. And if left untreated, it can lead to dehydration. Every year, too many children die from something that easily cured by a regimen of fluids and simple antibiotics. But without money or faith in modern medicine, the villagers take his chances with the Singaga. Crude diagnosis. Oh, I know what's wrong, the wizard says. You have a snail. A snail? It's almost positive. You must remove it at once. The wizard goes into his bag of roots, powders, and bones and pulls out a light bulb. Lift up your shirt, he says. Without plugging the bulb into anything, he moves it along across the person's stomach as if to illuminate something only he can detect. There it is. You see the snail moving? Oh, yes, I think I can see it. Yes, there it is. The wizard returns to his bag for some magic potion, which he splashes across the belly. All better, he says. Yes, I think the snail is gone. I don't feel it moving. Good. That will be 3,000 kawachas. For a little extra money, the Singaga can cast curses on your enemies, to deliver floods to their fields, hyenas to their chicken houses, or terror and tragedy into their homes. This is what happened to me when I was 6 years old, or at least I thought it did. I was playing in front of my house when a group of boys walked past carrying a giant sack. They worked for a nearby farmer tending his cows. That morning, as they were moving the herd from one pasture to another, they discovered the sack lying on the road. Looking inside, they saw it was filled with bubble gum. Can you imagine such a treasure? It can't begin to tell you how much I love bubble gum. Now, as they walked past, one of them spotted me playing in a puddle. Should we give some to this boy, he said. I didn't move or say a word. A bit of mud dripped from my hair. Why not, his friend said. He looks kind of pathetic. The boy reached into his bag and produced a rainbow of gumballs out of one of every color and dropped them into my hand. By the time the boys disappeared, I shoved every one of them into my mouth. The sweet juices dribbled down my cheek and stained my shirt. Little did I know, but the bubble gum belonged to a local trader who stopped by our house the next day. He told my father how the bag had dropped from his bicycle as he was leaving the market. By the time he circled back to look for it, the bag was gone. The people in the next village told him about the herd of boys. Now he wanted revenge. I've gone to see the Singa, he told my father, and whomever ate the bubble gum will be sorry. Suddenly, I was terrified. I'd heard what the Singa could do to a person. In addition to delivering death and disease, the wizard controlled armies of witches who could kidnap me during the night and shrink me into a worm. I even heard about them turning children into stone, leaving them to suffer an eternity in silence. Already I could feel the Singas watching me, plotting his evil. With my heart racing, I ran into the forest behind my house to try to escape, but it was no use. I felt the strange warmth of his magic eye shining through the trees. He had me. At any moment I would emerge from the forest as a beetle or a trembling mouse to be eaten by the hawks. Knowing my time was short, I hurried home to where my father was plucking a pile of maize and tumbled into his lap. "It was me," I shouted, tears running down my cheeks. "I ate the stolen gum. I don't want to die, Papa. Please don't let them take me." My father looked at me for a second and shook his head. "It was you, eh?" he said, then kind of smiled. Didn't he realize I was in trouble? "Well," he said, and his knees popped as he rose from his chair. My father was a big man. "Don't worry, William. I'll find the traitor and explain. I'm sure we can work something out." That afternoon, my father walked 5 miles to the traitor's house and told him what happened. And even though I had only eaten a few of the gumballs, he paid the man for the entire bag, which was nearly all the money we possessed. That evening after supper, my life had been saved. I asked my father if he truly believed I was in trouble. He became very serious. "Oh, yes, we were just in time," he said, then started laughing so hard his chair began to squeak. "William, who knows what is in store for you?" My fear of wizards and magic only grew worse whenever Grandpa told stories. If you saw my grandpa, you might think he was a kind of wizard himself. He was old, and he couldn't remember the year he had been born. So cracked and wrinkled his hands and feet looked as if he was chiseled from stone. And his clothes, Grandpa insisted on wearing the same tattered coat and trousers every day. Whenever he emerged from the forest, puffing out his hand-rolled cigar, you'd think one of the trees had grown legs and started walking. It was Grandpa who told me the greatest story about magic I'd ever heard. Long ago, before the giant maize and tobacco farms came along and cleared away our great forest, when a person could lose track of the sun inside the trees, the land was rich with antelope, zebra, and wildebeest, also lions, hippos, and leopards. Grandpa was a famous hunter, so good with his bow and arrow that it became his duty to protect his village and provide his meat. One day while Grandpa was out hunting, he came across a man who killed by a poisonous pit viper. He alerted the nearest village, and soon after they returned with their witch doctor. The Singa took one look at the dead man, then reached into his bag, tossed some medicines into the trees. Seconds later, the earth began to move as hundreds of vipers slithered out of the shadows and gathered around the corpse, hypnotized by the spell. The wizard then stood on the dead man's chest and drank a cup of potion, which seemed to flow through his feet into the lifeless body. Then, to Grandpa's amazement, the dead man's fingers began to move, and he sat up. Together, he and the wizard inspected the fangs of each snake, looking for the one that had bitten him. "Believe it," Grandpa told me. "I saw this with my own eyes." I certainly believed it, along with every other story about witches and things unexplained. Whenever I went down the dark trails alone, my imagination spun wild. What scared me most was the Gul Wamkula, the magical dancers that lived in the murky shadows of the forest. They sometimes appeared in the daylight, performing in tribal ceremonies when we Chua boys became men. They were not real people, we were told, but spirits of our dead ancestors sent to roam the earth. Their appearance was ghastly. Each had the face and skin of animals, and some walked on stilts to appear taller. Once I saw one scurry backwards up a pole like a spider, and when they danced, it was as if 1,000 men were inside their bodies, each moving in the opposite direction. When the Gyu Wakulu weren't performing, they traveled the forest, and Dambos looked for young boys to take back to the graveyards. Whatever happened to you there, I never wanted to know. Whenever I saw one, even at a ceremony, I dropped everything and ran. Once when I was young, a magic dancer suddenly appeared in the courtyard. His head was wrapped in a flower sap, but underneath was a long nose of an elephant and a gaping hole in a mouth. My mother and father were in the field, so my sisters and I ran for the bush when we watched the dancers snatch our favorite chicken. Unlike the Gul Wakulu or Senga. In the market, most witches and wizards never revealed their identity. In the places where they practiced their magic, mystery abounded like strange weather. In the nearby town of Nistisi, men had bald heads standing as tall as trees, walked the roads at night. Ghost trucks traveled back and forth, approaching fast with their headlights flashing and engines revving loud. Yet when the light finally passed, there was no truck attached. In one of the neighboring villages, I heard about a man who had been shrunk so small by a wizard that his wife kept him in a Coke bottle. In addition to casting spells for curses, the Singa often battled one another. At night, they piled aboard their planes and prowled the skies looking for children to kidnap as soldiers. The witch planes would be anything: a wooden bowl, a broom, a simple hat, and each as capable of traveling great distances. Malawi to New York, for example, in a single minute. Children were used as guinea pigs and sent for tests the powers of rival wizards. Other nights they visited camps of other witch children for games of mystical soccer, where the balls were human heads stolen from people as they slept. Lying in bed at night, I would become so frightened thinking about these things I'd cry out for my father. "Papa!" I shouted, summoning him to my door. "I can't sleep, I'm afraid." My father had no place for magic in his life. To me, his made him seem even stronger. As a devout Presbyterian, he believed that God, not juju, was his best protection. "Respect the wizards," he would tell me, straighten my bed covers. "But remember, William, with God on your side, they have no power against you." I trusted my father, but as I got older, I began to wonder how his explanation accounted for Chuck Norris, Terminator, and Rambo, who arrived at the Wembley Trading Center one summer and caused all kind of ruckus. These men appeared in action movies that played in the local video show, which was really just a mud hut with benches, a television, and a VCR. At night, wonderful, mysterious things happened there, but since I wasn't allowed out after dark, I never saw any of them. Instead, I had to hear stories the very next morning from friends whose parents weren't so strict. "Last night I watched the best of all movies," said my friend Peter. "Rambo jumped from the top of the mountain and was still firing his gun when he landed at the bottom. Everyone in front of him died and the entire mountain exploded. He pretended to clutch a machine gun and fire in all directions." "When will they start showing these films during the day?" I said. "I never get to see anything." The night the Terminator came to the video show, it was simply shocking. When Peter found me the next morning, he was still in a state. "William, I just don't understand this movie. This man was shot left, right, and center, and yet he still managed to live. I'm telling you, this Terminator must be the greatest wizard ever." It sounded fantastic. "Do you think the Americans have such magic?" I said. "I don't believe it." "This is what I saw," Peter said. "I'm telling you, it's true." Although years would pass before I saw any of these films, they began influencing the games at home. One was a shooting game that I played with my cousin Jeffrey, using toy guns we made from a polony bush. Finding a straight branch, we removed its core like taking out the insides of a ballpoint pen and used it as a ramrod to fire paper spitballs. I was the captain of one team, and Jeffrey was the captain of the other. Along with our cousins, we formed squads and hunted one another between the houses in our village. "You go left and I'll go right," I instructed my soldiers one afternoon, then crawled on my hands and knees through the red dirt. My poor mother was constantly scrubbing our clothes. Right away, I spotted Jeffrey's trousers from around the corner of the house. Slowly, without spooking the chickens, I snuck up behind for an easy ambush. "Tonga!" I shouted, then jammed the ramrod, sending a shower of slime into his face. He clutched his heart and fell to the ground. "E meo ni," he gasped. "You got me."